Cimoooooooo!
Welcome to Tech Tuesday, a weekly series where we discuss some awesome tech cards as well as help make you a better player. This week's card is Rivalry of Warlords, a really cool floodgate trap that's really going to help make you some rivals and turn you into a savage warlord. Now, Rivalry of Warlords is a continuous trap with a pretty nifty effect that only allows each player to control one type of monster. And then if there's multiple types, the player chooses one and sends all the rest of those to the grave. Now, why is this a good tech card? Well, let's go ahead and look at some of the best decks of the format to see how we can utilize Rivalry of Warlords to our advantage. Now, let's start with Necros. Now, Necros actually have a pretty wide variety when it comes to monster types in their deck. I mean, Manju and Senju are Fairy, Unicorn and Valk are Spellcaster, and then Trish, Brio, and Clausulus are Warriors. So the cool thing is, if your opponent does their opening play of just summoning a Manju or a Senju, and you flip Rivalry of Warlords, they're not going to be able to summon any other monsters since that's the only type of monster in their deck that's a fairy. So you're pretty much going to shut them out from doing any other plays until either they have another Manju or Senju they can summon next turn, or you just clear that card for them to be able to do that all over again. And what's cool about this too is that if you know that your opponent has Trish, you can actually kind of use it to delay Trish from being summoned if they have a non-warrior monster on the field. I mean, you can activate this before they use the mirror. They have to send all of their monsters to the grave that aren't of one specific type. Then they're not going to be able to summon Trish because they're going to have either a fairy or a spellcaster monster on the field. So it gives you just enough time to be able to delay Trish until you find a way to properly out it. Now let's talk Burning Abyss. Now Burning Abyss, while the main deck lineup might all be Fiend-type monsters, Dante is in fact a warrior, and so if you flip Rivalry of Warlords when you see your opponent's about to go into a Dante, they're not going to be able to since those two monsters are technically Fiends, and Rivalry of Warlords prohibits any monster from being summoned that isn't a Fiend while it's face up, since your opponent does control a Fiend. So that's really useful to know. The situation also works vice versa as well. If your opponent controls a Dante, they're not going to be allowed to control any other Burning Abyss monster since they're all Fiends. They'd still go to the graveyard, but regardless, it's not going to matter because they're not going to generate any sort of advantage off of it because they're not going to be able to summon anything. And I mean, Scarm could search something, but I mean, outside of that, they're not going to be able to summon it even if it is a tour guide, so that's pretty funny. Now let's move on to Shaddoll. So what's really interesting about this is that although the deck is primarily Spellcaster types, Construct is actually a fairy and Shekinaga is a machine. So what's neat is that if they attempt a fusion, they're not going to be able to summon a Construct or a Shekinaga because they're different types, and Rivalry of Warlords prevents that. What's also cool about this too is that since Shaddolls are actually primarily running the Clown engine, since both of the monsters are Spellcasters, they are forced to go into a Spellcaster type Xyz monster if they do choose to overlay. Meaning they can't go into King of the Pharaoh Imps to search out that Gigabyte, they can't go into something like Exciton because Exciton is a Fiend, and they also can't go into something like Castel because Castel's also not a Spellcaster. Basically limiting their only option to Trapeze Magician. And even with Trapeze Magician, they can't use the OTK of that and Construct since they're both different types, so that's actually really cool as well. Rivalry of Warlords also just wrecks Ritual Beasts. I mean, Apelio is a Pyro, Pink Dolphin is an Aqua, Kanahawk's a Winged Beast, and then all the Tamers are Psychics, so being able to just do that and just completely stop them from going off into any of their fusion plays is really, really good. What's also neat about Rivalry of Warlords is that its effect sends monsters to the graveyard. It doesn't destroy. And that's really relevant because if you flip this when your opponent, say, has a face-up hand, like Fire Hand, if they're forced to send the Fire Hand, Fire Hand's not going to trigger because Fire Hand needs to be destroyed for it to trigger. So the effect of Rivalry of Warlords to send can actually be fairly relevant. And ultimately, Rivalry of Warlords just waves its finger at the extra deck, because if your opponent wants to go into any sort of Synchro play or Xyz play, not only do the monsters already on the field have to be the same type, but the monster that they're attempting to go into also has to be the same type as those monsters. So that kind of lockdown on an extra deck can be really all you need sometimes to win. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about Rivalry of Warlords. I think it's a pretty cool trap card. I mean, it's not one of the best floodgates ever, but it still does a lot of work considering where we're at in the format right now. Thank you all so much for watching the video. We'll see you next week.
Cimoooooooo!